which I had kind of started early on, and so he was just a little more aggressive than normal. As it turns out, he was talking to Nativo López. And Malo was the nickname of his father. My dad and his father had both been paratroopers. They'd grown up on the streets of Los Angeles. They're boxers. And so they knew each other, and it was interesting because Nativo and I had already been friends. And now there was this incredible story, this special story about how our fathers had been friends and had been engaged in some very important times as people who defended their country, committed to service. Nativo was a sixth generation Mexican American. And so in the 1970s when we met, he was already a well-known activist in the community. We met, I was in college, and we were part of an organization called CASA, Center for Autonomous Social Action, General Brotherhood of Workers. At that time, it was unusual and rare because there weren't many pro-immigrant organizations. There was no CHIRLA, Radesen, or any of these other groups. There was just CASA right over here on New Hampshire and Pico, next to Vermont. And so I remember I joined CASA, and Nativo was one of its leaders, and I got to meet him, learn about him. He also had been an athlete, a star athlete in Norwalk, in high school, been an activist in colleges when he first started, helped found the Chicano Studies department at a local community college. And so we got to know each other, but he then uprooted himself to Santa Ana, to Orange County. Now that seemed not very strategic when you think about the Orange Curtain in those days. It was a Republican stronghold. It was not a place that you could think you would go and organize immigrants and workers. But that he did. He went down and spent much of the 80s under the tutelage of Bert Corona, the legendary union and immigrant leader. He organized tenants and organized a historic tenants Red Strike. He also organized to learn English so that they could become citizens. And the product of all that work was later he was elected to the Santa Ana School Board, was its president. And then later on led initiatives to build more schools in Santa Ana so that there would be, much like we are here in Los Angeles, the process of making sure there's adequate schools and infrastructure for the burgeoning Latino population. Of course, he continued to do that work. It was not popular, but it was the right thing to do. And he was the best at it. He built a large and loyal base. We reunited and met again in the early and mid-90s when I was head of SCIU Local 660. He and Bert came down to my office. I remember the meeting a Saturday morning also with some young activists, a guy named Fabian Nunez and a guy named Kevin De Leon. They were there with Juan Jose Gutierrez, who was in many respects a protege of Nativo. And we talked about our efforts to defeat this Proposition 187. And 187 was a controversial proposition. It was anti-immigrant. It was part of the unthoughtful process that Chris Korbach comes up with of trying to be as draconian as you can towards immigrants. Not very thoughtful because it doesn't appreciate the value immigrants play in our society, not just today, not just in our history, but in the future. But that was a value that Nativo and I shared, an incredible love and commitment for immigrants and for this nation. And so Nativo and I began to work again. Bert wrote a great book about Bert. We did some programs around that. And then later there was a crisis around LA County. And Mr. President, you made me remember this because as we were protesting and putting lots of people on the streets for a year, many of those people were brought by Nativo López because that was part of our broad coalition. It was workers from the county, other union workers, but people from the community, and we could always rely on Nativo to bring busloads and busloads of workers immigrants to our rallies. Later on, as many of you know, I ran for the assembly. That's where the story begins, where we began to appreciate our common history. Nativo brought me this idea early on. He talked about the members of his organization who were being stopped and having their cars towed. And he said, we need a driver's license. We need to address this. And so that began kind of the work that I was noted for 15 years in the legislature. I became One Bill Gill. But throughout the entirety of that struggle, there were many people who came and found it to be novel and exciting, and then they would leave. But throughout that struggle, there was one singular person who was always there at my side, uncompromising, loyal to our shared values, and that was Nativo López. Always there without exception. When we were ridiculed, when we were vilified, when we were protested, people threatened us, he was always there, and he was uncompromising. During that time period, we were very active, and Nativo was one of the leaders of those mega marches that took place here in downtown Los Angeles, where literally millions of people showed up in defense of draconian. Carl was down the street and employed 10,000 immigrants at the highest wages around, and was one of the most productive and popular companies. When a hedge fund went after them to try to take them over, Nativo played a major role in defending the workers there. When the E-Verify system of the Obama administration was used to take workers out of their workplace, American Apparel was hard hit. Literally, a few thousand workers lost their jobs. And Nativo was there, I was there. It was brutal to see people lose their jobs simply because of a computer that could say, you have to prove your status to work here. But he was there because he was always there, because he loved the immigrant community. Loving the immigrant community meant he loved this nation. Many people found him to be controversial. I did not. I found him to be humble. I found him to be kind. I found him to be fearless. I found him to be generous. He was dependable. He was fiercely loyal to our shared values, to his family, whom he joined with, to his friends, and to the movement. For that, he will be deeply missed. The pain is unmeasurable. It is shocking. It's incomprehensible to think that I'm here today to talk about the loss of him. It's difficult to imagine going forward, but we will. He sent me a text when he realized he had cancer. And it's interesting because he said, no pity party here. I will beat this. We will beat this. We have a lot to do. We must beat Trump. We must organize. We will win. Venceremos. That's how he closes. And that's how I want to close this. We've got a lot to do. We will win. We must go forward. Venceremos. Nativo vive. Thank you so much.
If I may just say a few words. First of all, I want to give you my sincerest condolences. I think this year has been incredibly difficult for you and for close family members and brothers that you've lost this year. So first of all, my heart breaks for you. One of the things I can recall about Nativo is the fight against 187. At the time, I had just graduated from high school. No, actually, I was still in high school. And I remember the marches down Van Nuys Boulevard, and I remember the incredible resilience of the Northeast San Fernando Valley, particularly in the Pacoima community. And I remember meeting him for the first time, but one of the things that struck me the most was an incredible love for a really, really good friend of ours, Soledad Cholia La Torres, who he loved as his mother, who I loved as my second mother. And I remember how much she would talk about him and how much she was constantly concerned that he was being targeted by the police department and from federal government that just were just incredibly harsh on what he was trying to do. But one of the things that I recall last year when we honored Chole before she moved back to Mexico, we had her here upstairs. And I remember she told me that if it wasn't for Nativo making sure that no one swindled her from her home and making sure that all her finances were in place, that only because of him she was able to go back home with her sister and retire. Chole beat cancer, and Nativo was there to make sure that all her medical needs were taken care of and make sure that she had the right people taking care of her. And I will never forget how much she loved him, and vice versa. So my friend, I know it's hard. I feel for you. But everyone in this council chambers at one point has lost someone that was dear to their heart. And I know that we need to keep going. So with that, Nativo, rest in peace. We owe you a tremendous gratitude for all the different causes you fought with us, including in the San Fernando Valley, East LA, and the Orange County. Nativo was always there. And with that, thank you, sir.